Welcome to episode 100. Yes, 100 triple digits of the one and only podcast. I'm Mark Shapiro, and I'm obviously very excited today because we have hit the century mark, something that I never could have really foreseen coming when I launched the podcast back in April of 2015, and I left my six-figure job, taking a big risk to take a stand for being authentic and being real. And I definitely thought at the time, who am I to be the person who's asking this question and having the conversation? But it's been my commitment since the get-go to bring you raw, vulnerable conversation with authentic, inspiring leaders and to have the conversations that nobody else is having. So the one and only podcast, my vision for it was to be the one and only podcast that's having these types of deep, vulnerable conversation, willing to look around the nooks and crannies and corners that no one else is looking at or talking about publicly. So here we are, episode 100. I am truly humbled that you're here listening and that you've shared this podcast with those you love and that it's grown to where it is today. It is only just the beginning, and I am super fired up, and I'm committed to going even deeper, to asking more intimate, challenging questions, and just straight up going there and opening up myself. So we've got a great episode for you today. I've really put my heart into this episode and just kind of channeled the greatest lessons and everything that I've discovered here in all of my research on authenticity. And, sadly, I'm a firm believer that we live in a world that's truly void of it, and that it's a big catalyst for some of the challenges in our relationships and our careers and the problems that we're facing at a larger level in our communities and society and in the country here in the US. So I wanted to share with you some of the investigative, exploratory discoveries that I've made here in all of my conversations and all of my research. Definitely stick around till the end of this episode. I've got a big announcement that I'm excited to share with you. So stick around for that. And in the interim, I just got to thank you. Thank you for supporting me, for believing in me, for encouraging me, for tuning in every single week and, having the courage for all of us to look at ourselves. It's not encouraged here in this world. So I love seeing it. And I love that so many of you are, taking big stands in your lives and in your relationships to be truly most real. So awesome job. And I just got to give a couple shout outs before we get into this episode. Huge shout out to Aaron Kamiko, who sat by my side and we flushed out this episode. And Aaron, thank you for all of your incredible wisdom and leadership. Aaron's actually going to be in the hot seat as our guest next week in the 101st episode of the podcast. So Aaron, so much love to you. Great episode coming to all of you next week. And then got to give a shout out to my friends at Freedom Podcasting, to Jonah, to Hannah, to Ian and V, for believing in me and partnering with me from the start. Thank you for your amazing and quality production work. I definitely don't give you enough credit, and I truly appreciate you. Also, to all of the guests that I've had on the show, thank you for believing in me, not just believing in me, but opening up and playing with me. I'm asking you tough, vulnerable questions. So thank you for going there with me and really being an example of what's possible when we're willing to allow ourselves to be seen. So on that note, we've got a phenomenal episode for you today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 100. Yeah. So it's January 2017, and throughout the lifetime of the podcast and my practice and exploration of authenticity, I've had many deep conversations and coaching sessions, interactions with thousands of people across all realms of life, watching the news and the media and marketing, and I've noticed something. And what I've noticed is that we have a big problem. we're not being real with both ourselves and each other. There's things that we don't want to look at, focus on, and talk about that are lingering and affecting our relationships with ourselves, the quality and depth of our relationships with others, and our ignorance, righteousness, and lack of responsibility for the world at large. The result, we've become jaded, disconnected, unkind to others, addicted to our phones. Many of us have become skeptics, stagnant, powerless, with a disregard to our moral codes, not living our core values consistently, and getting swept up with the wind of our emotions and getting lost in the noise. There's an epidemic, and all these repercussions for our inability to figure this out. Well, the kicker is a reality TV star being elected the president of the United States. Now, there's 4 blocks through all of my work that I've discovered that are causing this and getting in the way, that we can attribute this lack of authenticity, this epidemic, to. I share this with you because it's valuable and it's always a great reminder. Whether you can relate today to anything I'm going to talk about, can relate to something from your past, or an experience that you could have at some point in the future. It's not meant to scare you or to make you feel wrong, but I want to have a conversation about the things that are real and present in the world today that we're just not talking about and try to look away from. The things that enable us to be real and truly live happy and fulfilling lives. The 4 blocks are: number 1, social and societal conditioning. The environment in which we were born and which we live in every single day of our lives. Secondly, it's that we're lying to ourselves. Yes, we're lying to ourselves in so many areas of our lives. Number 3, we're scared to be authentic. We have fear about pursuing our dreams and speaking our truth. And the fourth reason why there's such an epidemic and a lack of authenticity is because we don't know how. We're not taught or encouraged or supported to be authentic. So when you put those 4 factors together, it's no surprise why you're hearing the word authentic seemingly every single day, whether in the news, in marketing. Everybody wants to be authentic, but it's one thing to have an idea and to talk about being authentic, and it's another thing to actually be it. So let's get into those 4 blockage areas. As you're well aware, from the second that we're born, the second that we arrive on this planet, we're programmed, mostly initially by our parents, to be and act a certain way, to fit a certain mold. And it's largely based on our parents' values and experiences and how they define success and happiness. And I think we all, at some point in our lives, tried to emulate our parents, literally. Perhaps practicing putting on makeup, something I know a lot of girls have done. Or if you're a boy, putting on your dad's tie or shaving your face 10 years before you can grow facial hair, something that I definitely did. And as children, many of us, especially boys, when we cried as young kids, we were told not to cry, that that's not okay. And as a result of that, we built a shield and aren't willing to get vulnerable. We also learned to lie from our parents as they lied back to us, sometimes with good intention to keep us from the truth and darkness of everyday life and what's happening around us. But our parents also told us to keep secrets and or lie maybe to our other parent or sibling, like, don't tell your mom I took you to McDonald's. So we get the seeds of deception planted into our lives at a very young age. And even as babies, we learn to lie and manipulate. As a baby, all we want is our mom and dad's love and attention. We'll cry, even if we're not hungry. We just want to cry because we want that love and attention. And it's a little deceptive. And as we grow up and move into adolescence, we really start to feel that urge to want to fit in and be well liked. And we are once again rewarded for fitting in and falling in line, being able to participate in the conversation at the lunch table in school by, let's say, being up to date on the latest trends, whether you like them or not. I mean, I wore cargo pants and shopped at Abercrombie and Fitch for years, and those outfits were tacky and terrible. And while that mode may have served us back at that lunch table and within the context of growing up at school at that point of our lives, it doesn't serve us if we're making too many decisions based on what we believe others think as we become grown-ups. And sadly, those messages are rained on us every day from our family, friends, and definitely brands and the media, who will do anything for ratings because that's what they care about. They don't care about your well-being. And when you put it all together, we get lost in the noise. There's just an endless amount of noise and not working towards goals that are our own, but rather derived and adopted from that noise and the marketing. And as a result, we project the ideal versions of ourselves to others. And we've created these avatars that we display both in our daily lives and even more so on social media, and convince ourselves and try to convince others that that's the real version of us. This last week, CNN published an article on the concept of gaslighting, and it was done in the context of Donald Trump. And it was said that gaslighting will become one of the biggest buzzwords of 2017. So gaslight, the definition is it's a form of manipulation through persistent denial, misdirection, contradiction, and lying in an attempt to stabilize and delegitimize someone. Its intent is to sow seeds of doubt in the targets, hoping to make them question their own memory, perception, and sanity. Now, this article was said in the context of Donald Trump, which probably makes too much sense. But on a lesser level, are most Americans doing the same thing? When I read that article, that's what I began to wonder. When looking at ourselves, are we painting the mirage of the lives that we're living when we share ourselves with others, just sharing the highlight reel? And by doing so, making it appear that our lives are all light and glory. And, we do that because we want to be acknowledged, liked, and approved. I mean, I want all of you guys to think that the podcast is rocking and rolling and kicking ass, so you'll be more likely to tune in and tell your friends about it. That's definitely a truth of mine. And when we do that, when we just share the highlight reels, we make others feel like they're maybe doing something wrong and perhaps make them feel like they can't relate to the rest of the people who are just sharing the highlight reel. I think we've all compared ourselves to other people's avatars, and while our intention behind it might have just simply been to brag on Facebook and to share our highlights versus the whole story, I don't think that we're thinking about the negative impact on others. So, and we ask ourselves how Donald Trump got elected president. Well, perhaps it's because he is an exaggerated version of what we are already doing. No one knows what is fact and what is fiction. There are so many half-truths. And ultimately, we're losing faith and trust and isolating ourselves. So we're desperate for change, no matter what it looks like, and we're throwing a Hail Mary. And with this web, and it's become the norm of unintentional gaslighting, where we've gotten so good at lying to ourselves that we really lost touch of what's real and also what's fiction. We think that chowing down on that whole tub of ice cream is going to make us feel better. And then we get a stomach ache. And we knew we were going to get a stomach ache, but we did it anyways because we thought it would make us feel good. We call something that is heavily filtered and edited reality TV. We set firm definitions and limits on ourselves about what we're capable of. These are limiting beliefs, and they're only true if we subscribe to them. We lie to ourselves, and lying is an attempt to connect our wishes and fantasies to our reality. And since we have such a discomfort with uncertainty and the unknown, we try to make everything certain and control things by creating reasoning and justification. We make up stories about every objective thing we experience in our lives, and we call them facts. When, while they may have felt true, they're just a story that we're subscribing to for that particular subject or event, or the story that we're subscribing to in the way that we see ourselves. When really, in reality, there are an infinite other ways and perspectives we could have adopted. Let's talk about what it means to be successful, a term that most would define based on achieving some form of tangible result. Yet, we work our asses off, get to a certain milestone, and we're still not happy. And we wonder why we're still so unfulfilled. So how can that be the criteria for success? And as someone who struggles with this myself, I constantly am working to reach aggressive goals, whether in impact or financial or even statistical goals with the podcast. I really appreciate it when Lewis Howes came on The One and Only and challenged the traditional definition of success back in episode 46 when he said, living a life of authenticity, integrity, and giving your best in every moment. That is success. Now, these are values that I strive to live by every day. But oftentimes, I don't give myself enough credit for when I don't produce the exact result I seek. And then I beat myself up about it. And I just did it last week when enrolling people into my Winning Weeks Mastermind program. I chose to see the part of the picture of me not hitting my goal of getting 40 people. And instead of being blessed and feeling truly grateful and humbled to be entrusted by these 34 incredible and committed people to support them in accomplishing their goals and living authentically, and aside from the fact that 34 people represented over 50% growth for the program over the previous cycle, and that I made more money in a 10-day period than ever before in my life, I still chose to look at the part of the picture where I didn't hit my goal of 40. I didn't choose to look at the full picture, which when I do brings me tremendous joy, gratitude, and opportunity. Moving on. It takes more effort to lie and cover it up than letting ourselves be seen. But somehow we can convince ourselves otherwise. I mean, come on. As humans, we all ask ourselves, who am I? Right? And we want to feel like we're here for a reason. And while we're desperate to be seen and feel like we matter, it's ironic in that we don't let people see the real us. We hold things back. We don't let people in or let ourselves shine. I personally pride myself on being transparent and authentic as much as possible. And at the same time, I have challenges with intimacy, especially in romantic relationship. Right now, I've talked about it on the show, and I've personally struggled to let women in because I'm scared to get hurt again. We even lie to ourselves about the idea that we're being real. Sometimes we think we are being authentic when we actually have an ulterior motive. And usually, oftentimes, that's to feed our ego. And in that case, it's ego driven or righteous versus being genuine and pure. That's the definition of authenticity in the dictionary. Or how about the times that we say we're committed to our goals and then make endless excuses to break them? And when we do that, it's super subconsciously damaging to our relationship with ourselves. When we renegotiate, we're always going to lose. We're going to feel worse about ourselves and perhaps even deflate what we think that we're ultimately capable of. Oh, I'm on that diet, but I worked out twice this week so I can eat an entire pizza and also a side of French fries with gravy on top. It's short-term emotions and fixes over long-term vision. And while there's nothing wrong with both in balance and moderation, and it's okay to change our goals if our priorities change, but if it becomes a pattern and we're not in integrity with ourselves, then our words mean nothing. And it only gets easier then to lie to ourselves. And that's why external accountability is so important and effective. We try to please others and often put others' interests and objectives before our own, or get lost, just straight up lost in life's noise. And it was a beautiful interruption when Dallas Clayton, one of my favorite artists, reminded us back in episode 38, don't exchange any part of your life for some nonsense. That's such a duh, that's so obvious, but such an exceptional point as well. The amount of time and energy I apply to trying to look good and replying to, let's say, every email that I get, even if it doesn't feel important or even sometimes necessary, yet I'll still spend 5-10 minutes trying to get the words to show that I care. I mean, what game am I even playing? So no wonder it's frustrating that we might not be exactly where we want to be in our life, wishing that our circumstances were different or that we were 5 years ahead of where we really are today. I mean, I can't even recall how many times I've said, I wish I learned emotional intelligence as a kid, and wondering where I'd be today if I did. But in reality, we're exactly where we're supposed to be based on the stories we've made up for ourselves and the choices we've made and how we respond to life's challenges and circumstances that have led us to this exact moment right here, listening to the podcast. And with that awareness, we can choose whichever perspective we want to adopt, which story we want to subscribe to and apply to our lives. As Wayne Dyer once famously said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Let's look at the feeling of frustration and disappointment, which we all get the pleasure to experience when we don't get what we want, which as humans is something that we can all relate to. We can either let that frustration ruin our day, our week, perhaps our year, or see the learning and or apply the perspective that author and coach Kute Blackson shared with us in episode 80 when he said, I'm so glad things didn't happen how I wanted them to happen because the reality is I wasn't ready for them yet. Speaking of where we are at and where we want to go, we're definitely lying to ourselves about our full potential. I certainly am, even though I feel like I dream big. And most of us would rather live a lie rather than be uncomfortable and stretch and grow. We tell ourselves, we're happy. Yep, I'm happy. Even though we have a job we dislike, we no longer do the things we once enjoyed, we don't make the time for creativity and self-expression, we're not spending our time on the things that we really value most. We say, I am who I am, and I'm hardwired this way. And as a result of having a fixed mindset like that, we get stubborn and settle for good enough versus truly extraordinary. Many of us also think that we'll either never get what we want or it'll somehow just magically land in our lap. I definitely felt that when I was working at Showtime for a dozen years. I had high ambitions for myself, but thought these amazing opportunities would land in my lap. And I certainly never imagined being here having this conversation with you today. Wherever you are on this spectrum, I know you can agree and relate to this Einstein famous quote when Einstein said, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results." One thing that often gets overlooked when we're being inauthentic is we think that it only impacts us. But now with our country, look around us. It impacts the world at large. We're all playing this game. We're all keeping things to ourselves. We're all avoiding things, pretending we don't know what's really going on in our lives. And given the state of the country in the US and all the disconnect, bullying, confusion, we're at a major crossroads. Things can continue to go down this road and get worse, perhaps, or we can choose to rise up and create the change we want to see in the world, to take responsibility for not only our own lives, but to realize that our behaviors and our actions impact others and can be extremely valuable. Or we can just perpetuate the current trend. Really, in any moment, we can either choose our vision and love or our fear. But if we're going to choose our vision and our love, that's going to require us to get out of our comfort zones. And we have a perhaps false belief that our comfort zone will be easier. We will have more stress if we take risks. But the reality is humans get anxious. We get out of alignment. We have fear. We have doubt. So if you're going to feel those anyway at times, you may as well feel them while also going after what you want most and pursuing and accomplishing your goals. How about that? I recently had Mark Cronin, a legendary reality TV producer on The One and Only. And he said, if you can realize the things you're afraid of are imaginary, you'll live a bolder and more successful life. He also said, it's easier to be rejected when you're lying versus speaking your truth because it's much more vulnerable. Both very valid and strong points in my opinion. When you put these factors together, the underlying element, the root cause, is fear. We're scared that we won't be accepted, we won't get love, aren't worthy of love, and that we could be shamed or outcast. I have that very feeling right now as I deliver this podcast episode. And I feel it oftentimes when I lose sight of what's real in the moment and start making up stories about the future. We are our own worst enemies. We get lost in self-doubt, feeling like we're not good enough, not worthy. We fear our light, fear of being uncomfortable. We've gotten to be so good at playing it safe that we have a low tolerance for anything. We let perfection be the enemy of good, as Max Lugavere said in episode 36. We numb out. And we have a million go-tos to numb out. Our phones, social media, food, over and under eating, substances. We've got no need to face what's real. And we've gotten so good at avoiding discomfort that why would we do anything differently? I think we can all agree and know what fear feels like. And since I advocate choosing love and vision over fear, let's move on, move forward, and I'll leave you here about fear with these two quotes. As my dad said to me at my bar mitzvah back in 1994, he said, never, ever give up on yourself. If you want something bad enough, just go out and do it, even if the odds are stacked against you. And as Marshall Dunn said in episode 93, fear and suffering can be the spearhead for love and wisdom. The choice is ultimately up to us. The fourth reason why we have a major epidemic and a lack of authenticity in the world is we don't know how to be authentic. In school, as children, we learn information. We're taught the importance of memorization. We're not taught how to love, how to connect, accept, and support one another, to really know ourselves. I mean, look at how much of the curriculum doesn't translate into real world skills of any notable kind. I mean, while geometry and calculus would be great for a mathematician, I can't say they serve me much today. And I honestly remember way more about who was in my geometry and calculus classes and who I sat next to than what I learned in the class. While we're starting to learn the importance of vulnerability and that it's a strength, not a weakness, we still don't have the skills to do so. We struggle to differentiate between the voices of our mind and our heart, and we get lost in egoic tendencies. We settle for surface level talk versus talking about what really matters and building deep, meaningful relationships. Relationship expert Kira Asatrian, back in April of this past year, shared with us that the average American only has 2 people they can talk to about anything. And she also said that 25% of people have no one that they can really talk to about what's truly most important. Wonder why. We view the feedback of others as an attack that we take personally versus as a loving gift. We're attached to our judgments, agendas, and being right versus being open, compassionate, and understanding. In other words, we're selfish and self-centered. And as much as I hate to personally admit that, there are selfish motives in everything. Though I definitely do my best to ensure that the selfishness is also accompanied with a part that serves others. Instead of being patient and flowing with life, we can't deal with the uncertainty and we try to force things and end up swimming upstream. We're not taught how to get centered and how to deal with stress and anxiety and all of life's noise and challenges. We're overly sensitive and give our power away entirely too much. We wait for permission and encouragement to be ourselves, which is absolutely ludicrous, versus simply being real and authentic and telling ourselves, I can be whoever I want to be, baby. And the last reason why we don't know how is that we're not doing it. We don't know how to be authentic because we're not living it. We're not breathing it. We're not practicing it. We're intimidated and not doing the daily or weekly practice. And this is why I started the podcast in the first place, to create an arena where we talk about things that no one else is willing to talk about. And while I am definitely not perfect and have my shortcomings and I have my vices, like being so hard on myself, choosing ignorance when it's convenient, like with the food I consume and the waste I dispose, not taking fantastic care of my body. I haven't gone grocery shopping in months and have been constantly eating out. Drinking alcohol, vaping, and an addiction to technology. I'm constantly checking my stats. Lean on masturbation when I feel lonely. With all that, I'm committed to bringing my dark to the light and adopting healthier habits that will serve me in both the short and long term and hopefully have some sort of positive impact on you and others. I realize that, like with anything, mastery takes practice. And as a man committed to walking the talk, I'm focused on being the best I can be and having this conversation with you so you too can check in on a weekly basis and so we can all learn from one another and ultimately bring more of ourselves and our inherent beauty to the world. Having shared those 4 major blocks that are standing between our current reality and our authentic world, which are social and societal conditioning, the lies that we tell ourselves, the fact that we just flat out lie to ourselves, our fear, and the fact that we're just not taught how to be authentic and we just don't know how to do it. So, with all that, there is so much room for growth and a ton of resources that are available to those that are willing to lead the way. So, with all that, I have a ton of hope as to where we're going as a collective people in this world. So with that, I wanted to share with you some valuable reminders and or new tips for you. So the first one is to check in with yourself as much as humanly possible, to listen to and to stay aligned with your truth, whether through self-reflection, journaling, meditation, or physical activity, and to just really, really trust your intuition. As Steve Jobs said, have the courage to follow your heart. Sometimes it knows what you truly want to become. And that quote, trusting my intuition has led me to this place today because I never thought in a million years that I'd have a podcast about being authentic, let alone be releasing 100 episodes. The next tip is to ask yourself what you really want in all areas of your life, not just one area, not just professional, but in your relationships, in your romantic relationships, in your familial relationships, in your social relationships, and to really get to the root as to why. Why do you want these things? Is it really for you, or is it based on external influences and pressures? As Tony Robbins famously once said, if you want better answers, ask better questions. Another tip, and this one I'm really going out on a limb here and saying this one, do what you want. So do what you want over people pleasing and making decisions that align with your truth. Another invaluable one, and this is one that I definitely need to hear and practice myself, is to celebrate yourself daily and to treat yourself as well as you treat others. We've heard that one before. I personally can't get that reminder enough. Lean into what you try not to think about or are pretending not to know, and embrace your darkness. It's an asset, not a liability. Challenge your thoughts, also known as your ego, that voice in your head. Are the stories that you're telling yourself actually real? And if they're not 100% fact, what would your life be like without those stories, those limiting beliefs? And what more supportive stories can you adopt that will support and empower you? Like going from I can't, or I'm not ready, or I'm not good enough, to a story where you tell yourself, I'm courageous, I'm committed, I'm going to do it like the time that I did before when I was successful. To harvest deep, meaningful relationships, lead the way with openness and vulnerability, because it starts with you. Don't be waiting for somebody else to open up. Don't be vague or give one-word answers if you want to connect with someone. Tell them how you really feel, what you're experiencing. And if you want help teeing up that type of conversation, consider asking for permission. Like, can I share something personal with you? Or can I be real with you? And by opening up, it often makes others feel more comfortable in opening up to you. If you find yourself going to surface level talk like the weather, consider asking more personal questions, such as when you're meeting someone, what do you love to do? What are you most excited about? And then perhaps move on to more deeper, challenging questions, such as what do you think about most? Or what are you afraid of? Or when do you feel most challenged? When I ask those questions to people, whether on the podcast or in real life, so as long as I'm not jumping to them immediately, that we're building some relationship first, it always supports me in harvesting connection and building a relationship that will be sustainable and that's built on mutual connection and understanding. And if you're in that kind of conversation, and if you get a vague answer that doesn't quite make sense, don't shame yourself for not understanding it. I used to do this all the time. I used to beat myself up for not understanding what somebody else is telling me, or telling myself that I'm not a good enough listener. But if you feel that, don't shame yourself. Ask a follow-up question to gain a greater understanding. Perhaps it was the other person just having a tough time articulating their point in a clear manner. So ask them for clarification, dig a little bit deeper so you can really get the person to open up more. And if you feel like the person that you're in relationship with or talking to, if you feel like you're on the same page and are open to have a more intimate conversation, always ask for permission to go deeper. Ask them, can I make an observation? Can I ask you a question? Getting permission is absolutely crucial for creating agreement and trust. Agreement and trust, direct derivative of asking for permission. And with that, it opens the door for deep, meaningful conversation. In my opinion and in my experience, whether with coaching or connecting with friends, getting that permission is the best way to lower the walls and remove guardedness. And for relationships that are most important to you, whether romantic, familial, or with a really close friend, create checkpoints where you can be real with each other about whether you're getting what you want out of the relationship, and get on that same page and purge any sub-narratives that are causing frustration and getting in the way. In episode 22 of the podcast, transformational trainer, one of my greatest teachers, Michael Strasner, discussed that he and his wife have weekly check-ins. Another thing you can do is create a new relationship with feedback. This has been one of the biggest game changers for me. And instead of looking at feedback and constructive criticism as a jab, looking at it as a way that it's meant to serve someone. So if you're receiving it, it's a gift to you. And if you're giving feedback to someone else, that it's a gift to them. Whether you are on the serving or receiving end, your relationship with feedback is a powerful gift. For me, I want to be as effective as possible in everything that I do. And I want to ensure that I'm showing up to others and to you in a way that is congruent with my intention. So feedback as to how I'm being perceived by you and what works and what doesn't work, like with the podcast, if there's parts of the podcast that annoy you or that you don't like, or parts of the podcast that you do like, it would be incredibly valuable for you to let me know. I can also only see the world through my eyes and my lens, and getting information from others or from you, that it's not a jab, but it's actually an extremely valuable thing for my self-awareness and my overall growth. Just in this past week's episode, Jeff Scalt shared with us a beautiful message and 4-prong roadmap as to how you can share any message with anyone. And the criteria for that, it's based on an old Buddhist teaching that you can say anything to anyone as long as it's 1, true, 2, important, 3, timely, and 4, said with loving kindness. And I really want to hit the point home on number 4, said with loving kindness. If we're coming from a place of love, you create that permission and you create that trust before you deliver some constructive feedback, there is a much greater chance that that message is going to resonate and land with the recipient because they know that you're there for them and that you're not just there to shoot them down. Like authenticity, which I call a practice, listening is also an art and a practice. And a great way of being more effective at creating authentic, deep, meaningful relationships with others is to become a better listener. Withholding your judgment, listening, really hearing the person's story, putting yourself in their shoes, not having an agenda or not having to be right and to chime in. There's a way to both be empathetic of somebody else and to feel what they're feeling without completely giving your power away. So create the space for someone to be real with you. And like I said, it always starts, in my opinion, opening up to someone else and being real with them first. They're going to be much more open to giving you the real talk in return. Couple more things. 1, be a sponge. We're both teachers and students in every moment, as InQ said in an early episode of the podcast. And as Michael Strasner said, he always aims to be a sponge, to really take a look at others and those he respects and to see what's really working, what characteristics or behaviors that he would want to embody in himself. And so I love that. And I'm constantly looking at people I respect and seeing that the way that they show up, the way that they carry themselves, whether in their physical stature or, how playful they are in certain situations. And then I have the ability to try those on and to practice them. We all serve a role that only we can fill, and we can accomplish so much more together than we can on our own. So regardless of how giving you are, or if you feel like you found your purpose or not, to each and every one of us, I want to invite you to give more and to extend your reach, to make a greater impact. And for me, that is taking a greater ownership of what I'm creating here with the podcast and to really be in relationship with my results. I would love to support as many people as possible. And one way of doing that is to live by example and hope other people will embody that authenticity as well. So I really want to work together is what I'm saying here. So let's partner up here and support each other. And if you feel like your vision aligns with mine, what I'm doing here with authenticity, definitely let me know. I want to hear from you. I have to admit that 100 episodes into the podcast here, that I don't know who most of you truly are. I see the numbers, the statistics, and right now about 1,500 people are listening to the One and Only podcast per week. But I'd say that I've probably only heard from a few hundred of you. So I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear, who you are and what you're up to. And like I said before, I want to make myself vulnerable and I want to request your feedback. I want to know what's working for you. I want to know what's not working for you. Like I said, I would like to know what, if anything, annoys you about this show or any way that I can make it better or any subjects that you would like to see tackled in the show. So if you're looking to practice being real and to give feedback, I've got my hand raised and I'd love to hear from you as to your real experience of me. On that note, thank you. And then a couple final things here before we get into the next segment of the show. Some things that you can do to, really focus on your self-development. And I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know, but daily meditation, doing yoga to get centered, going for a run, reading a book, listening to a podcast, surrounding yourself with other inspiring people that you admire and respect, going on an international adventure, attending a workshop, doing a mastermind, or getting a coach. There's just infinite things that you can do to work on yourself. So I invite you to do that. And if you're struggling with accountability, to rely on a community to be real with and to give you feedback. At the end of the day, you have 4 choices. Being the person you've been, the person you think you are, the person other people think you should be, or the person you want to be. Your intention creates your reality. So ultimately, it's up to you. And I invite you to make the best choice for yourself every day. As artist Allison Kunith said in episode 20 of the podcast, act as a walking advertisement for what you want in the world. Broadcast it. I figured I'd spend the next part of the episode telling you a little bit about the behind the scenes of launching this podcast and running it and giving you a look on the other side of the curtain to where I sit. The One and Only was birthed out of my BU Authenticity Workshop, which is now the Are You Being Real Workshop. And the workshop was a huge hit. People were making changes in their lives as a result of the evoking questions and exercises that I put them through in the workshop, that I wondered what's next. And pretty much at that point, everyone who attended the workshop had been in my personal network or was a friend of a friend. And I thought to myself, this message of being real and authentic, I really need to get this out there to more people. And the next logical step for me was to launch a podcast. When coming up with the concept for the podcast, it's always been my intention to get real and to embody authenticity and vulnerability and to bring on inspiring people who I respect and look up to and get real with them and ask them questions about how they see the world, what they stand for, their personal philosophies, when it's been most challenging to be authentic, and to have a beautiful, vulnerable, and real conversation, to have the conversations that most people aren't talking about. So I came up with the idea for the show. I wrote down a list of 15 influential people in my network, and I figured, all right, I'm going to have these 15 people on, and they'll share the podcast episodes that they're on with their networks, and I'll be able to grow an audience. And if it works, then I'm going to go out and I'm going to use my Rolodex and call the most influential people I know in the music and TV and self-development businesses. And I'm going to have them get me in touch with Oprah and Tony Robbins and Justin Bieber. And I'm going to have all those people on the show. Well, at the time, I had no idea even if those 15 people on my immediate list would say yes, let alone the possibility that I could get Richard Branson on my podcast. Well, fortunately for me, I won on one of those, and I was quickly able to get all 15 of those people on my list on the show, which was a huge win for me. I didn't know if they'd say yes. So the fact that I had them on the podcast and they opened up so beautifully and received a lot of great feedback, that I knew that I had something. What I didn't know is that even still, close to 2 years later, I still wouldn't be having the type of guests like Tony Robbins or Oprah on the show. So based on results, I'm not there yet, but I'm committed to making this show as impactful and enjoyable and beneficial and valuable for you. And I'm committed to getting there and bringing you some of those really influential figures like an Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra. So I am working on it, and I'm committed to overcoming my own personal adversities and challenges, mostly self-imposed obstacles, in order to bring you some more notable, maybe recognizable, inspiring guests. In terms of some of the lessons that I've learned from the podcast, the first one is learning to trust myself and to own my voice, something that is an ongoing practice, and really making the show about creating amazing content for you instead of just being in my own self-critical lens of how I'm conducting the interview and if I'm asking all the questions that you're going to want to hear the answers to and that the interviews flow well. Because when I'm coming from that place, it doesn't work. When I'm committed to serving you and being present as I conduct the interviews, that's when it does work. Another thing that worked and was a huge breakthrough for me was when I chose to open up and to do a solo episode in episode 24. So I did 23 one-on-one interviews before I personally had the courage to get behind the mic all by myself and to share and speak my authentic truth. Frankly, I was scared that no one would care or would want to listen, and I would see it right in front of my eyes in the results. But that wasn't the case, and that solo episode tended to do really well. I got a lot of great feedback on it, and I've done a lot more solo episodes since then. Another thing that's definitely worked for me is taking smart risks. In the summer of 2016, about 9 months ago, after being encouraged by a handful of people to interview myself, I chose to take up Javon Langford on his idea for me to do a Facebook Live and to interview myself. And being the courageous risk taker that I am, that wasn't hard enough. So I asked for people to submit questions on the podcast for that Facebook Live ahead of time. And I reached out to close family members and friends and had them submit the questions that they thought would be the hardest for me to ask myself and to answer. And I had the questions literally sent to me 30 seconds after I started the Facebook Live. So I didn't have any time to prep them, and I went one by one, got extremely vulnerable, more vulnerable than I've ever been in my entire life publicly, and I answered the questions. And I learned a lot about myself in that self-interview and was able to see how much I had grown in the first, I believe, like 69 episodes or so of the podcast, and just to see how powerfully I was showing up, especially in comparison to those early episodes when I honestly had no idea what I was doing. Now, with that smart risk that I took with the Facebook Live, it actually really fueled a lot of positive momentum. And I wanted to share this with you because of how firmly I believe in getting out of our comfort zones and taking smart, creative risks. As I was thinking about what questions people were going to ask me for that Facebook Live, I thought one of them might be, when are you doing your authenticity workshop again? The context on that is I hadn't done the workshop in about a year. When I did the workshop the previous time back in the summer of 2014, it just didn't go well. Something about it didn't flow and didn't work, and I put it on the shelf for an entire year. And since I thought someone was going to ask me when you're going to do it again, because people had gotten value in it in the past, I just went ahead and called up Andrew Keegan, who I've also had on the show, and I booked a date for the workshop. So on that Facebook Live, and even though no one asked me when I was going to be doing the workshop again, I announced the next workshop. And as I was prepping for that Are You Being Real workshop this summer, I thought to myself, well, if I'm bringing together 40 to 50 people, what if people at the end of the workshop want more? What if they want additional services? So I'm like, well, I've got my one-on-one coaching, but how about I have something else like a mastermind program, something that was an idea, but I didn't know how it was going to look or who it would attract. And I was a little scared about it. But in those couple of days before that workshop, I came up with the concept for Winning Weeks, and I announced it for the first time at that workshop. So going back, that Facebook Live encouraged me to do my workshop, which encouraged me to come up with the idea for Winning Weeks. And while no one signed up for Winning Weeks at that workshop when I announced it, when I did launch Winning Weeks later this past summer, 15 people chose to participate in Winning Weeks. Most of them being people who I had pre-existing relationships with, people I love and respect and was so excited to support, and people who I had never reached out to support individually with one-on-one. But I felt more comfortable reaching out to them for a group-based program with Winning Weeks, and they were on board. So not only did I get 15 people, which was about 3 times more than anyone I had supported at any particular time in the first 16 months or so from launching the podcast, that I really learned that my core target for Winning Weeks is conscious people, authentic communicators, people whose lives were working and wanted to take their game to the next level, whether professionally or financially, or to get more real with people they care about and love in their relationships, being more authentic, doing a better job at time management, aligning their time with their priorities. Or some people in the program wanted to get greater clarity on their next move or to tap into new levels of joy and passion and creativity. And the results speak for themselves with the 15 people in Winning Weeks 1. So I did Winning Weeks again this fall and had 20 people. So it was an increase in 5. And once again, the results were terrific. And the reason why I'm telling you here is because it kind of reaches a crescendo here, because this chain of events of those smart risks that I'm taking has led me to where I'm at today. So as we're doing episode 100 here, it was a huge milestone for me, not only that I reached episode 100, but with the launch of Winning Weeks 3 here this past week, which has 34 incredible people in it, with the enrollment of that program and the tuition that I collected, I actually made more money in 10 days than I ever made in a month at Showtime. So huge, huge win for me. I absolutely love Winning Weeks. I love it for the most part because I get to support 34 people right now, and there's nothing more fulfilling than that, to get to have powerful one-on-ones and deep dives with everybody, and then to see everybody support each other is truly humbling and unbelievable for me. And it also was proof to me that I can create something on my own. In my first 16 months after leaving Showtime, I was relying on my savings, mostly from some real estate investments I've made over the last number of years, together with a pretty unsuccessful one-on-one coaching practice, not because I wasn't a good coach, but because I wasn't a good salesman. And so to be here today, it really is a testament that success takes courage and it takes consistency and time. 100 episodes. It took me 100 weeks releasing a podcast every week to get to where I am today, which not only is the 100th episode, but also the very same week that I earned more money than I ever did at Showtime. So huge win. I'm excited to share this win with you because there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears along the way. It really hasn't been easy. When I started the podcast, there were 0 listeners, and now there's about 1,500 people who are listening. And I am just grateful to be with you here to support you in absolutely any way I can. As I said earlier in this episode, I want to get to know more of you. I'd love to have more of you in winning weeks. And if there's any other products or services or things that I can offer you, definitely let me know. Or if you have any feedback as to how I can make the podcast better, I would love that as well. From the magic that's come out of the podcast, and when I say magic, it's been from the relationships that have come out of it, from Hans Kolbeek and Joe and a number of people who have reached out to me, who I've built relationships with because you listen to the podcast. I absolutely love that. Maddie Pryor. The common thread here is that people who listen to the show are really friggin' smart. And I love that. It's really cool to hear how educated you are because oftentimes I feel like what I'm saying is so obvious. And sometimes I wonder how smart I am. So it's really cool that we've got such an intellectual audience here. And I look at that as that we're a bunch of leaders here. And we're a bunch of leaders having conversations about authenticity and being real in the world that we want to live in. And a valuable lesson that I learned from one of my greatest teachers, Michael Strassner, is the greatest distinction and the greatest thing that leaders can do is create other leaders. So it's really an honor to have an audience made up of so many of you who are up to big things in your life, true leaders. And my invitation is to continue to lead by example and to create other leaders. In regards to that magic that's come out of the show, I've gotten a couple of best friends out of the podcast. 2 of them being people who I've had on the show, Justin Brown and Taylor Conroy, 2 of my closest friends that I met just from interviewing them on the podcast. I've been able to sit down with so many people like New York Times #1 bestselling author Ryan Blair and legendary reality TV producer Mark Cronin, people who I just can't imagine I would have been able to sit down with, let alone have them come over to my home and to be able to share tea and a deep conversation with them has just been truly incredible. And there's also been magic that's come out of my social platforms like Instagram and Facebook. One that I got to note is Aaron Kamiko. You may have remembered Aaron from episode 91. We did something different in 91 where Aaron and I just each wrote down 6, 7 really intimate, kind of juicy questions and got mic'd up. And we actually didn't have the intention of releasing as a podcast, but it was so raw and good that we did it. But Aaron found me on Instagram and reached out to me, and now we're working together. Aaron actually was a tremendous help in getting organized for this episode when we were going over the 4 main sources and blocks as to why this world has a big void of authenticity. Aaron was very instrumental in helping me flush everything out, and she came up with just a bunch of amazing wisdom that I shared earlier in this episode. So huge shout out to Aaron. And Erin is incredible. She's actually going to be our guest in next week's episode. Erin is always challenging me to go deeper, to ask tougher questions. And she just straight up told me, ask me the toughest questions that you can possibly ask next week on the hot seat. So we've gotten a great episode coming for you next week. All right, it is time for the Truth Challenge. I'm going to put myself on the hot seat today for you. And I just came up with these 5 questions, and I haven't spent any time putting thought into them. So here we go. My commitment to you is to answer them honestly and authentically. So here is the truth challenge. Question number 1. What are the greatest lessons you currently need to learn? The first one for me is creating some time for rest and more sound boundaries in my work-life balance. I'm living my purpose. I love doing what I do with the one and only and winning weeks and Are You Being Real? And at the same time, I'm working around the clock. I'm finding myself struggling to keep up with all of my ideas and things that I want to do. And I'm frankly a little exhausted. So I'm committed to getting more rest and taking good care of my body. And so that's one thing. And I really want to have a romantic relationship and to meet a phenomenal woman to create something truly meaningful. And based on results, I haven't dated anyone consistently for close to 10 months or so. And to me, that's a reflection that I don't have the space in my life for it right now. So it's something I'm committed to. And then one other lesson that I know I need to learn as I've been reviewing this episode here, that I'm still very, very critical of myself. My self-critic is loud. So I have a ways to go in terms of being much more kind and gentle on myself. Question number 2. What have been your favorite and least favorite episodes of the podcast? So my favorite, I get asked this question a lot of times, and usually it's really tough for me because I'm proud of all the episodes. But the ones that I'm most proud of are the ones that I did myself because I had the courage to speak up. And I mean, it was definitely had the most fear around those. So those are my favorites. A couple of the other favorite ones, in my opinion, the one that I did with Mark Cronin recently, where I challenged him about the way that he uses this huge public platform with reality TV, and how I'd love to see more authentic, real connection and supporting people and creating beautiful, authentic relationships and resolution. Another one of my favorite episodes, I had a really special moment with the real Jerry Maguire, Lee Steinberg, when I talked to him about integrity in an episode earlier on in the show. I love the episode I did with Brian Reeves, who in my opinion is one of the greatest experts on the topic of authenticity. So those are a few of my favorites. In terms of my least favorite, I got to say it was episode number 10. And the reason why I did not love that episode is I felt like I kind of got used by the guest in that episode just to promote the things that he wanted to promote. And he actually didn't even share the podcast. And I haven't talked to him since. And it's also the most least listened to episode of the podcast. So don't use people, folks. In terms of straight up results, the most listened to episode of the podcast is the one that I did with Lewis Howes, and that's because he also released our conversation as a School of Greatness episode. So that conversation's been heard, think about over 75,000 times. And in terms of other really popular episodes of the show, the one I did with Rory Kramer, professional life liver, that's been heard over 7,000 times. And then the third most listened to episode is the one with Psalm Isadora on authentic sexual healing. So great episodes there. All right, next question. What is the smartest move I can make? The smartest move I can make, in my opinion, is to get into video. And that's because I'm already creating content, having people over at my house, in my home, to conduct episodes and interviews of the One and Only podcast. So it wouldn't be that much more work to bring in a couple of video cameras, one on my guest and one on myself, and to splice them up and put them on YouTube and make short form content that perhaps can be more shareable in a way that gets this important message of being real out there to more people. Question number 4, what feedback would I give myself? Well, I always, when I give feedback, like to start with what's working. So what's working is the consistency, 100 episodes in 100 weeks. What I'd say is working is the guests having inspiring people on the show who open up and get vulnerable, which is my intention behind the show, going really deep and asking different questions from my guests that aren't the status quo normal questions that are asked in interviews or on other podcasts, kind of having the courage to go there. In terms of areas for improvement, the top one, as I've mentioned throughout this episode, is being in better relationship, closer relationship with you. So I can really give you the content that you want on a weekly basis, to hit subjects that you want to hear about, and to best serve you, and also make this a show that you love to tune into every week and are proud of sharing with your friends. So on that note, if you've loved this episode, or I'd love to hear your feedback, as I've mentioned throughout this whole episode. And if you do want to share it, the episode is areyoubeingrreal.com/100. And then question number 5, what is your favorite quote or soundbite from the show so far? And this is kind of a fluid one. I love the quotes, the little soundbites that I've been posting on Instagram the last few months. So if you haven't checked those out, definitely check those out. But a quote that Dan Millman, the author of Way of the Peaceful Warrior, when he was on the podcast, he said, "When we don't know ourselves, we make the right choices, but for the wrong person, the one that we thought we were." And I think that that's an incredibly powerful quote. It ties right into the DNA of this podcast and the importance of being ourselves. So it takes us knowing ourselves to make the right decisions for who we truly are. So on that note, thank you for tuning into the Truth Challenge. As I mentioned earlier in this episode, I am committed to making a greater impact and extending my reach. And I'm really excited about something I'm going to announce to you right after the break in terms of my next big move in making an impact in the world.